Introduction. Why nations fail. Why are some nations prosperous and full of opportunities, while others seem trapped in poverty and despair? Is it geography, natural resources, or perhaps culture that determines a nation's fate? These questions have puzzled thinkers, economists, and historians for centuries. But today we dive into one of the most groundbreaking books of our time, Why Nations Fail by Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson, to uncover answers that might transform the way you see the world. This isn't just any book. The ideas and research behind it are so impactful that they contributed to Daron Acemoglu being awarded the Nobel Prize in economics. Why? Because the concepts presented here have changed how we think about the success and failure of nations. They reveal that the key to prosperity lies not in geography or natural resources, but in the institutions a society builds. Institutions that either empower people to thrive or trap them in cycles of poverty. This book is not just about economic theories or academic arguments, it's about real lives, real struggles, and the systems that shape them. By the end of this video, you will understand why some countries thrive while others fall behind, and most importantly, what we can learn to build better societies. So let's embark on this journey through history, economics, and human behavior to uncover the hidden forces that shape our world. To understand why nations succeed or fail, we need to explore the cornerstone of the argument presented in Why Nations Fail: Institutions. Acemoglu and Robinson categorize institutions into two types, inclusive and extractive, each having profound impacts on the fate of societies. Let's dive deeper into these concepts with vivid examples and practical insights. Inclusive institutions, pathways to prosperity. Inclusive institutions are those that provide opportunities for broad participation in economic and political activities. They guarantee property rights, enforce the rule of law, and allow individuals to pursue innovation and entrepreneurship. These institutions empower people, creating an environment where talent and hard work are rewarded. Example: South Korea. South Korea's rise from a war-torn nation in the 1950s to a global economic powerhouse is a testament to the power of inclusive institutions. Post-war, the government prioritized building strong legal systems, investing in education, and opening markets to competition. Ordinary citizens, regardless of their social standing, had opportunities to excel. Education. The South Korean government's focus on universal education allowed millions to access quality schooling, leading to a highly skilled workforce. Economic growth. Entrepreneurs like Lee Byung-chul, founder of Samsung, thrived in a system that protected property rights and encouraged innovation. South Korea's progress contrasts starkly with its northern neighbor, where extractive institutions have stifled growth and trapped millions in poverty. Extractive institutions, the road to failure. Extractive institutions concentrate power and resources in the hands of a few, excluding the majority from opportunities. These systems exploit the population and prioritize short-term gains for the elite over long-term prosperity. Example: colonial Latin America. During the Spanish colonization of Latin America, extractive institutions dominated. The Spanish crown implemented systems like the encomienda, which granted settlers control over indigenous labor in exchange for a portion of the output. Impact on society. This system created deep inequalities, where wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a small elite, while the majority lived in poverty. Long-term effects. Even after independence, many Latin American countries struggled to break free from the legacy of extractive institutions, resulting in widespread corruption and economic stagnation. A tale of two states, Arizona versus Sonora. Let's compare Arizona in the United States with Sonora in Mexico. Until 1854, both regions were part of the same geographical and cultural area. However, after Arizona became part of the U.S., it benefited from the inclusive institutions of its new government. Arizona. Investment in infrastructure, education, and property rights led to rapid development. By the 20th century, Arizona became a hub for industries like technology and agriculture. Sonora. In contrast, Sonora remained under Mexico's extractive institutions, plagued by corruption, lack of investment in public goods, and limited access to education for its citizens. The result? A stark difference in living standards, economic opportunities, and social mobility. Many believe that geography or natural resources dictate a nation's success, but Acemoglu and Robinson dismantle these theories with compelling evidence. 1. Geography. If location were the primary factor, nations with similar climates and resources should experience similar outcomes. However, examples like North and South Korea prove otherwise. 2. Resources. Countries rich in natural resources often suffer from the resource curse, where wealth from resources fuels corruption and inequality rather than development. Examples include oil-rich Venezuela and diamond-rich Sierra Leone, both of which suffer from extractive institutions. Key takeaway: institutions shape lives. Inclusive institutions are the engines of innovation, progress, and equality. They allow individuals to dream, innovate, and contribute to society without fear of exploitation. On the other hand, extractive institutions stifle potential, creating cycles of poverty and dependence. In the next section, we will delve into the historical development of institutions, exploring how critical junctures in history have shaped the fates of nations. These moments, from revolutions to colonialism, reveal the true power of institutions in determining prosperity or failure. Part 2. Debunking common myths about poverty and prosperity. Daron Acemoglu, the Turkish economist, and his co-author James Robinson don't just present their theory about institutions and why nations fail. They systematically dismantle the common explanations people often use to justify why some nations remain poor while others prosper. These misconceptions, such as the impact of geography, culture, or even politics, are challenged with historical evidence and real-world examples. Myth: geography determines prosperity. Many people believe that a nation's geographical location is the primary reason for its economic success or failure. This argument claims that regions with fertile lands, favorable climates, or proximity to trade routes are naturally more prosperous. But Acemoglu and Robinson argue that geography alone cannot explain the stark differences between nations. Case study: North versus South Korea. Both countries share the same geography, climate, and even historical roots. However, after their separation following World War II, the two nations took radically different paths. South Korea, by fostering inclusive institutions, investing in education, and supporting innovation, it became an economic powerhouse. North Korea, extractive institutions concentrated power in the hands of a small elite, leading to widespread poverty and stagnation. This comparison shows that geography is not destiny. It is the quality of institutions that determines whether a nation thrives or fails. Myth: culture shapes economic outcomes. Another popular belief is that culture is the primary driver of prosperity. People often argue that some cultures are inherently more industrious, innovative, or disciplined than others. However, Acemoglu and Robinson reject this idea, emphasizing that institutions shape culture, not the other way around. Case study: China and Mongolia. Historically, both China and Mongolia shared cultural and social similarities. Yet, their economic trajectories diverged dramatically due to differences in their institutions. China. Over centuries, China's centralized bureaucracy allowed for long-term planning and state building, although it has also faced challenges from extractive policies. Mongolia. Without strong centralized institutions, Mongolia's economy remained vulnerable to external invasions and internal instability. This example illustrates that culture adapts to the systems it operates within, proving that institutions have a more direct impact on economic success. Myth: natural resources guarantee wealth. It's easy to assume that countries rich in natural resources will automatically prosper. Yet the authors show that resource wealth often leads to corruption, inequality, and economic stagnation, a phenomenon known as the resource curse. Case study: Venezuela versus Norway. Venezuela. Despite its vast oil reserves, Venezuela has struggled with poverty and economic instability due to extractive institutions that prioritized elite interests over public welfare. Norway. In contrast, Norway's inclusive institutions ensured that oil revenues were invested in public goods, such as education and healthcare, creating long-term prosperity. This comparison reveals that resource wealth alone does not guarantee development. It's the management of those resources through inclusive systems that determines success. Many assume that having a democratic political system is enough to ensure economic success. While democracy can promote inclusivity, Acemoglu and Robinson argue that without strong institutions, democracy alone cannot solve the problem of poverty. India is the world's largest democracy, yet it still struggles with poverty, inequality, and corruption in many regions. This is because certain areas lack the inclusive institutions needed to fully empower citizens and promote equal opportunities. For democracy to thrive economically, it must be accompanied by strong legal systems, property rights, and investments in public services. 5 Myth: aid and external support solve poverty. Foreign aid is often seen as a solution for underdeveloped nations, but the authors explain that aid alone cannot fix the root causes of poverty. Without institutional reforms, external support often ends up reinforcing extractive systems. Case study: Sub-Saharan Africa. Billions of dollars in foreign aid have been funneled into African countries, yet many of these nations remain impoverished. Why? Because the aid often strengthens corrupt regimes rather than empowering citizens. Real change requires building inclusive institutions that enable sustainable development, not temporary fixes. Key takeaway: institutions, not myths, shape nations. Acemoglu and Robinson systematically prove that geography, culture, resources, and even democracy are secondary factors. The real driving force behind the prosperity of nations is the strength and inclusivity of their institutions. Without these, no amount of natural wealth or external support can lead to sustained development. Looking ahead, the role of history in shaping institutions. In the next section, we will explore how key historical events and turning points, from revolutions to colonialism, have shaped the institutions of nations, often locking them into cycles of poverty or paving the way for prosperity. Part 3: Historical turning points and the shaping of institutions. Institutions don't emerge in a vacuum. They are shaped by historical events, often referred to as critical junctures, moments of significant change that can set a nation on a path toward prosperity or lock it into cycles of poverty. In this section, we'll explore how revolutions, colonialism, and political upheavals have created divergent institutional paths for different nations. The Glorious Revolution, a model for inclusive institutions. The 1688 Glorious Revolution in England marked a turning point in the creation of inclusive institutions. This event overthrew the autocratic rule of King James II and established a constitutional monarchy that limited the powers of the monarch and empowered Parliament. Why it matters: the revolution created systems that upheld property rights and protected individual freedoms. It provided a stable legal framework that encouraged investment and innovation, fueling the Industrial Revolution. Example: imagine a small farmer in 18th century England. After the Glorious Revolution, they were protected from arbitrary taxation or land seizures by the monarchy. With secure property rights, they had the confidence to invest in new farming techniques, ultimately contributing to the country's economic growth. Colonialism left a lasting legacy in many parts of the world by imposing extractive institutions designed to exploit local populations and resources. The differences in colonial policies profoundly impacted the economic trajectories of nations. Case study: North versus Latin America. North America, British colonizers established more inclusive systems, such as representative assemblies and protections for property rights. These institutions laid the foundation for the United States' economic success. Latin America, in contrast, Spanish and Portuguese colonizers implemented extractive systems like the encomienda, where indigenous people were forced into labor to enrich colonial elites. Impact on people's lives. In Latin America, a laborer working under the encomienda system had little to no personal freedom or hope of upward mobility. Their exploitation perpetuated inequality and poverty, effects that are still visible in many countries today. The role of revolutions in shaping institutions. Revolutions can either dismantle extractive systems or reinforce them, depending on how they are carried out and who emerges victorious. Example: the French Revolution, 1789. The French Revolution aimed to abolish feudal privileges and establish equality before the law. While it led to significant institutional reforms, including the Napoleonic Code, political instability and authoritarian tendencies limited its long-term success. Compare this to the American Revolution, which successfully replaced colonial rule with inclusive institutions, fostering stable economic growth. The Industrial Revolution began in England in the late 18th century, driven by the country's inclusive institutions. These institutions protected property rights, enforced contracts, and encouraged competition, allowing entrepreneurs to innovate and expand. Opportunity for all. Ordinary workers could benefit from better wages and opportunities in the growing industries. Spread of innovation. Entrepreneurs like James Watt, who improved the steam engine, thrived in an environment that rewarded innovation. Contrast this with countries like Russia during the same period, where serfdom and extractive institutions stifled progress. Many former colonies inherited extractive institutions from their colonial rulers, creating challenges for post-independence governments. Case study: Botswana versus Zimbabwe. Botswana. After gaining independence, Botswana's leaders prioritized creating inclusive institutions, investing in education, and ensuring the equitable distribution of diamond wealth. Today, it is one of Africa's most stable and prosperous nations. Zimbabwe. In contrast, Zimbabwe's leadership perpetuated extractive systems, leading to hyperinflation, corruption, and economic collapse. Impact on people. In Botswana, children born in rural areas have access to quality education and healthcare, enabling them to contribute to the country's development. In Zimbabwe, many families struggle with poverty and lack of access to basic resources due to institutional failures. The power of path dependency. Acemoglu and Robinson emphasize the concept of path dependency, the idea that once a nation embarks on a particular institutional path, it becomes difficult to change course. Example: countries like Sierra Leone, which were shaped by centuries of extractive colonial rule, continue to face challenges in establishing inclusive institutions. However, moments of reform and leadership, such as Nelson Mandela's presidency in South Africa, show that change is possible with the right vision and effort. Key takeaway: institutions are the legacy of history. Critical junctures like revolutions, colonization, and independence movements determine whether a nation builds inclusive or extractive institutions. These historical moments have a lasting impact on the lives of individuals, shaping opportunities, freedoms, and economic prospects for generations to come. Looking ahead, lessons from the book. In the next section, we will dive into the most insightful lessons from Why Nations Fail, breaking down its core chapters to uncover actionable ideas for understanding and addressing the challenges of poverty and inequality. In this section, we break down the most significant lessons from Why Nations Fail to ensure a clear and comprehensive understanding of its core concepts. These lessons go beyond theory, offering practical insights into why some nations prosper and others remain trapped in cycles of poverty and inequality. By understanding these ideas, you'll gain a deeper appreciation for the role of institutions in shaping human lives and societies. Lesson 1: Institutions, not resources, determine prosperity. One of the book's most transformative ideas is that wealth or natural resources do not guarantee success. Instead, it is the quality of a nation's institutions, whether inclusive or extractive, that determines its prosperity. Key points. 1. Inclusive institutions empower individuals, protect property rights, and create opportunities for innovation and economic growth. Example: the United States became an economic leader not because of its natural resources, but due to its strong institutions that encouraged free markets and innovation. 2. Extractive institutions concentrate power and wealth in the hands of a few, stifling opportunities for the majority. Example: Congo, rich in natural resources like diamonds and gold, remains impoverished due to corrupt systems that exploit resources for a small elite. Lesson 2. Critical junctures shape the future. Critical moments in history, revolutions, wars, colonization, can determine whether a nation moves toward inclusivity or extractiveness. These junctures often create opportunities for institutional change, but the outcome depends on the decisions made by leaders and societies. Example: England versus Spain, colonial models. England's Glorious Revolution in 1688 limited the monarchy's power, laying the groundwork for inclusive institutions. Spain, however, maintained extractive systems, using colonial conquests to enrich elites while neglecting broader economic development. Why it matters. These critical moments define the institutional framework of nations, often locking them into paths that are difficult to reverse without significant reform. Lesson 3. Geography and culture are secondary factors. Acemoglu and Robinson challenge the common belief that geography or culture determines success. While these factors play a role, they argue that institutions shape the way geography and culture influence outcomes. Detailed example: North versus South Korea. Despite sharing the same geography, climate, and historical roots, North and South Korea followed vastly different paths due to their institutions. South Korea's inclusive institutions enabled widespread education and industrial growth, transforming it into a global economic leader. North Korea's extractive institutions concentrated power in the hands of the elite, leading to economic stagnation and widespread poverty. This example proves that culture and geography alone cannot explain economic disparities. Lesson 4. Inclusive institutions create virtuous cycles. When inclusive institutions are established, they tend to reinforce themselves, creating a virtuous cycle of prosperity and progress. These institutions allow citizens to participate in decision-making, hold leaders accountable, and ensure equitable opportunities. Example: Scandinavian countries. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway are known for their inclusive political and economic systems. Citizens have access to education, healthcare, and opportunities for upward mobility. Leaders are held accountable through transparent systems, reducing corruption and promoting long-term development. Lesson 5. Extractive institutions trap nations in poverty. In contrast, extractive institutions create vicious cycles where power and wealth remain concentrated and opportunities are systematically denied to the majority. Example: colonial legacy in sub-Saharan Africa. Many African nations inherited extractive systems from their colonial rulers. These systems prioritize short-term resource extraction over long-term development, leaving a legacy of inequality and corruption. Impact on education. Limited access to quality education prevents citizens from breaking out of poverty. Impact on governance. Corruption and authoritarian rule hinder institutional reform. Lesson 6. Leadership and reform are crucial. While institutions define a nation's path, leadership plays a critical role in steering societies toward inclusivity or extractiveness. Visionary leaders can break vicious cycles and create opportunities for reform. Example: Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Mandela's leadership during South Africa's transition from apartheid was pivotal. His emphasis on reconciliation and institution building helped lay the foundation for a more inclusive society. Impact. Though challenges remain, South Africa avoided the widespread violence and instability that many feared during its transition. Lesson 7. The role of foreign aid and external influences. Foreign aid and international intervention often fail to address the root causes of poverty because they do not reform the institutions that perpetuate it. Example: aid dependency in Haiti. Haiti has received billions of dollars in foreign aid over decades, yet it remains one of the poorest countries in the world. Why? Because corrupt institutions prevent aid from reaching the people who need it most. Contrast with Botswana. Botswana, which built strong institutions after independence, used its diamond wealth to invest in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, becoming one of Africa's most stable nations. Lesson 8. Path dependency and institutional reform. Once institutions are established, they create a path that is difficult to deviate from, a concept known as path dependency. Nations with extractive institutions often remain trapped in poverty unless significant reform occurs. Example: the United States. The U.S. benefited from path dependency created by its early inclusive institutions, which laid the groundwork for economic growth and political stability. However, even inclusive systems can face challenges, as seen in the growing influence of money in politics. Why reform is hard. Changing institutions requires dismantling entrenched systems of power, which is often met with resistance from those who benefit from the status quo. Education is a cornerstone of inclusive institutions. It empowers citizens, reduces inequality, and fosters innovation. Nations that prioritize universal education tend to experience sustained economic growth. Example: Finland. Finland's investment in education transformed it into one of the most equitable and innovative societies in the world. Key strategies: free and high-quality education for all, emphasis on teacher training, and equal opportunities regardless of socioeconomic background. Key takeaway: building inclusive institutions is the key to prosperity. The lessons from Why Nations Fail highlight the transformative power of inclusive institutions. By empowering citizens, protecting rights, and fostering innovation, These systems create a foundation for sustainable growth and equality. Conversely, extractive institutions perpetuate poverty, inequality, and corruption. Looking ahead, practical applications and a call to action. In the next section, we will explore actionable ideas inspired by this book. How can these insights be applied to real-world challenges? And how can we, as individuals and societies, contribute to creating inclusive systems for a better future? Now that we've explored the core ideas and lessons from Why Nations Fail, the next step is to apply these insights to real-world scenarios. How can nations, organizations, and even individuals contribute to building inclusive institutions and overcoming the challenges posed by extractive systems? This section focuses on practical steps and a forward-thinking perspective for creating positive change. Strengthening inclusive institutions at the national level. Governments play a critical role in establishing the foundations for inclusivity. The following strategies can help nations move toward more inclusive systems. Invest in education and innovation. Education is the great equalizer. Nations that prioritize accessible, high-quality education create opportunities for upward mobility and foster innovation. Example, South Korea's rapid development in the late 20th century was largely driven by its investment in universal education. By ensuring that citizens had access to quality schooling, the country developed a skilled workforce capable of driving economic growth. Key actions: allocate significant budgets to public education. Promote STEM fields while ensuring a well-rounded curriculum that includes critical thinking and creativity. Create scholarship programs for underprivileged communities. Ensure accountability and rule of law. Corruption and weak legal systems are hallmarks of extractive institutions. To build trust and foster inclusivity, governments must prioritize transparency and accountability. Example, Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Denmark have implemented robust anti-corruption measures and transparent governance systems, ensuring that public resources benefit all citizens. Key actions: implement anti-corruption reforms, such as public monitoring of government spending. Strengthen judicial independence to protect property rights and ensure fair trials. Introduce mechanisms for citizen participation in decision-making processes. Decentralize power. Concentrated power often leads to extractive systems. Distributing authority across different levels of government can promote inclusivity. Example, federal systems like the United States allow states to experiment with policies and governance models, providing a balance of power and opportunities for innovation. Key actions: empower local governments to manage resources and address regional challenges. Create checks and balances to prevent abuse of power at all levels. Tackling extractive systems in organizations. The principles of inclusivity apply not just to nations, but also to organizations and corporations. Inclusive practices in workplaces can lead to better productivity, innovation, and employee satisfaction. Build inclusive workplace cultures. Organizations that value diverse perspectives and provide equal opportunities tend to outperform those that don't. Example, companies like Google and Microsoft have invested in diversity and inclusion programs, recognizing that varied perspectives lead to more innovative solutions. Key actions: ensure equal pay for equal work. Establish mentorship programs for underrepresented groups. Promote transparency in hiring and promotion processes. Foster ethical leadership. Leaders set the tone for institutional culture. Ethical leadership is essential for creating systems that prioritize fairness and accountability. Example, Patagonia's focus on sustainability and fair labor practices has made it a model for ethical corporate leadership. Key actions: train leaders in ethical decision-making and inclusivity. Hold executives accountable for promoting fair practices. Encourage employee feedback and participation in decision-making. Empowering individuals to drive change. While systemic reforms are crucial, individual actions also play a significant role in fostering inclusivity and challenging extractive systems. Advocate for inclusive policies. Citizens can influence government and organizational policies by participating in democratic processes and advocating for change. Example, grassroots movements like those for civil rights in the United States demonstrate the power of collective action in reshaping institutions. Key actions: stay informed about local and national issues. Join or support advocacy groups that promote inclusivity. Use social media to amplify voices and spread awareness. Invest in lifelong learning. Education doesn't stop in the classroom. Individuals who continuously seek knowledge and skill development are better equipped to navigate and influence complex systems. Example, programs like Khan Academy and Coursera have made lifelong learning accessible to millions, empowering individuals to pursue new opportunities. Key actions. Dedicate time to self-education on topics like governance, economics, and social justice. Encourage family and friends to engage in discussions about these issues. Share valuable resources, such as books, articles, and videos, with your community. Developing nations often face the dual challenge of overcoming extractive systems while building inclusive ones. The key is to focus on long-term reforms rather than short-term solutions. Foreign aid should be used as a tool to build institutional capacity, not as a substitute for internal reforms. Example, Rwanda has effectively used international support to rebuild its institutions after the 1994 genocide, focusing on healthcare, education, and governance. Key actions. Use aid to invest in infrastructure and education. Partner with international organizations to strengthen local governance. Avoid reliance on donor-driven policies that may not align with local needs. Strong, inclusive leaders can inspire change even in challenging circumstances. Example, Botswana's post-independence leadership prioritized equitable resource distribution and institutional stability, setting the nation on a path of sustained growth. A call to action, building a better future. Why Nations Fail teaches us that institutions shape the destiny of nations, organizations, and individuals. The path to prosperity is not easy, but it is possible with collective effort and a commitment to inclusivity. The role of FactUp channel. At FactUp, we believe that knowledge is the foundation for meaningful change. Our goal is to act as a school for life, encouraging critical thinking and empowering individuals to challenge conventional wisdom. By sharing these ideas, you're not just learning, you're contributing to a global movement for progress. Closing statement. Imagine a world where every individual has the opportunity to thrive, where governments are accountable, and where institutions empower rather than exploit. This is the vision that Why Nations Fail offers us, and together we can make it a reality. Share this video with anyone who values thinking differently and learning deeply. Let's build a community of changemakers, one thought at a time.